again, Adrian Amos out here. Still first day of spring. I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into some conversations that I've heard recently around what I'm defining as this post-security world. And I'll back up and say that I got the privilege of attending the 4th annual, I think, CyberCon VA last month at the Science Museum of Virginia. At a previous iteration of the exact same conference was where I learned for the first time about this concept of what Gartner calls continuous threat exposure management, and what we kind of as practitioners might think of as more directly just risk management, right? Inside the Microsoft Defender space, they call it exposure management. Blend of the two. Whatever you call it, the idea is pretty simple. Rather than like digging into all the underpinning settings of every single security solution available to you, and rather than hiring a human being to drain the actions in SecureScore, which I had a customer tell me they did several years ago. Fantastic job. If you're hiring for that role, call me. But the conversation really talked about exposure management 2 years ago, right? I think it was 2 years ago. And they were talking about how you can't really lose a lot of sleep worrying about what the latest 0 day is, or what the next TikTok is going to be that's going to drain your network, or all this kind of stuff, right? You need intelligent solutions that sit on top of that. And I can vet this by saying that in the years that I've been doing these security immersion experiences, the question I usually start with as an icebreaker is what keeps you up at night. And again, I'm doing these things for like 9 years, and I can pretty well predict in most organizations it's going to be business email compromise and ransomware, right? Those are kind of the big two. Well, exposure management in the Defender portal lives above all of the individual workloads and is fed by all of them in aggregate. And what I've noticed in the last several times that I've done these immersion experiences or demos or whatever is I don't really go into the actual workloads anymore. In fact, customers aren't asking me to dig into the actual workloads. Yeah, Defender for endpoint, we got that, no big deal, right? Identity protection, yeah, we got that, no big deal. Defender for cloud apps, you have it. I guarantee you're not using it, but you have it. So why is this really relevant to this post-security idea? Well, it's interesting because I don't show the workloads, right? I go and I show how an organization is leveraging those workloads to meet the metrics requirements to protect against specific threats, specific risks. And then I move on to identity and data management. And the crazy thing is, as I learned at the end of CyberCon this year, by being in a Microsoft shop, I didn't actually realize we are so many years ahead of the rest of the industry with that ability to correlate, aggregate, and action on the information that's surfaced directly from the workloads. Now you can say, oh no, that's not true, I got a SIEM, it does it all. But now you're taking all of these disparate workloads and you're putting them into some third party and you're doing your reasoning over the risk there. It's not what's happening here. What's happening here, and this is where the industry has not caught up and won't for years, is that each of these systems, each of these defensive tools generates its own risk signals that it then intelligently shares with the rest of the Microsoft ecosystem. Now, how do I know we're ahead of the industry? One of the sessions at the end of the day was from a group of guys talking about how they're trying to establish exactly this behavior across security tools in the wild. And it was wild. Listening to these guys talk about trying to build consensus across disparate organizations that want you to buy into their full suite, or invest here, don't buy them. And they were talking at this particular conference, in this discussion, about how they were seeing a roadmap to standardizing a protocol within the next 5 years. That's before you even get enough vendors on board to deploy it. So when I talk about the Microsoft security products, I actually really don't demo them anymore. I just demo how they work together. But the other thing, and and we talk a lot about data security, is that the beginning of the conference also talked about the risk that AI apps present. They're talking about all this app risk, right? Saying that an app that today is just a standard workload, it just processes something. Well, now the vendor goes back in and they say, now with AI, your CASB says, oh, hold on. That's now an AI product. Block it. And this was a risk that was brought up by several people. Heard it repeatedly. I've heard it since the conference as well from customers. And I think what we have to do as security practitioners is recognize that this is actually very similar to the 16 to 32-bit shift in software development. We had a whole bunch of saber-rattling doom and naysayers back in the olden days who told us, you can't let that 32-bit app talk to your data. It'll break your data. Well, it really didn't. And ultimately, all apps became 32-bit, right? Many apps are now 64-bit. We are not relitigating that. What's happened and what's happening is a fundamental shift in software development. This is just the new model. So instead of worrying about what specific app introduces an AI risk to your data, I would suggest look at what risk your data presents when introduced to apps. Flip the conversation, understand the risk of your data, understand the risk that it represents in terms of financial, reputational harm, come up with a data protection strategy, and I will just tell you, if AI enablement is part of your roadmap, you really, really, really need to start the security conversation with the two levels of the pyramid, identity and data. Let the devices and the apps fall to their commodity protections as they will. All right, that's enough for this one. Catch you next time.